Hello, everybody. I'm Howie Hawkins. I was the Green Party and the Socialist Party candidate for president in 2020. And this podcast, Green Socialist Notes, is about continuing to educate and advocate for the eco-socialist program that we ran on. So let's talk about the election on Tuesday. Um, I think the big takeaway is it was a massive vote against Trump. The Democrats won a lot of races, but I don't think it was so much for the Democrats as it was against Trump. And it was a nationalized election. Local issues didn't make that big a deal in most local and state elections. So you had the wins for the governor of New Jersey with Mikey Sherrill, and then Virginia, Abigail Spanberger. They both won by 14%. Harris won those states by 6% a year ago. So I think that shows an anti-Trump vote. The anti-Trump vote trumped local issues. We saw that in the 2/3 vote for redistricting in California, which is defensive against the move in Texas. And it's a national issue, not a state issue. And we saw that in another example, the sweep of state Supreme Court judges in Pennsylvania for the Democrats in a state that is a purple state. You know, Democrats and Republicans both win statewide. And I'll just give you, in my county of Onondaga, which includes the city of Syracuse, its suburbs, and rural hinterlands, the Democrats won the county legislature for the first time in 50 years. Since the post-Watergate rejection of the Republicans in 1975. And it wasn't local issues. I mean, the newspaper interviewed Republican candidates, Democratic candidates, said, what were the voters saying when you were out there on the doors and on the phones? And they said, the issue was Trump. And people wanted to vote against Trump. And so they used county legislative races, two suburbs that lean Republican. The Democrats swept their town council races. So I think the big conclusion we can draw is Trump is losing a lot of support, and people not only don't support him, they want to do something against him. I think another sign of that was the acquittal of Sandwich Guy. He's the one that threw a salami sub at a Border Patrol officer in Washington, D.C. as a gesture against, their immigration raids. And the sub hit the Border Patrol officer on his chest that was protected by a bulletproof vest. But in court, the patrol officer said the sandwich exploded all over him. But then the jurors saw a videotape and the sandwich fell to the ground, still in its wrapper all together. So, the cops lie. I've had that experience, in civil disobedience actions, and I'm charged with disorderly conduct or criminal trespass, and the cops make stuff up. I mean, that happens all the time. But, the Department of Justice at first tried to charge him with felony assault for his sandwich, and the grand jury refused to indict him. And they say you can indict a ham sandwich at anyone can indict a ham sandwich at a grand jury proceeding. But I guess you can't indict someone who threw a sandwich because, the jurors weren't going for it. And then the Justice Department came back with a misdemeanor assault charge, and the jury refused to convict him. So I think that's reason for us to be hopeful that Americans on the whole are reasonable and have a common sense of justice, in contrast to the mean-spirited MAGA fascist minority, which has a lot of power in the federal government, but does not reflect the people. And I think that's what the vote showed. Now, a lot of people on the left are celebrating Mamdani's election and saying it signals a move to the left by the electorate. I don't see it that way, honestly. Mamdani's victory was 50.4%. That's the same margin, 50.4%, that David Dinkins got, a DSA member, running against Rudy Giuliani in 1989. The combined vote of Cuomo, the corporate Democrat endorsed by Trump, running as an independent, and the Republican candidate Curtis Sliwa was 48.7%. So it was less than a 2% margin for Mamdani, who, really ran a good campaign. They had, last I heard, 150,000 people canvassing the city. They had millions of dollars to run with, not as much as Cuomo, but plenty to get their word out. They had good social media, yet they barely won, or at least if you add Cuomo and Sliwa together. Cuomo spent millions on media ads, and it was a fear-mongering, Islamophobic, xenophobic, crime-focused, racist campaign against Mamdani, very similar to what Giuliani did with dog whistles against, which was more anti-Black crime, but fear-mongering that Giuliani did against Dinkins in 1989. And so the results are basically the same. So, how much has New York City politics changed? It seems to be still very racially polarized. There's a fear of crime, even though crime is down from what it was in 1989. Yet the results are basically the same. And then you got to remember, if you're real optimistic about, what Mamdani is going to do, Giuliani came back 4 years later to beat Dinkins and get reelected twice. So while the country is voting against Trump, Mamdani underperformed people like Mikey Sherrill and Abigail Spanberger, who won by 14% in states that have much larger Republican registrations than New York City, which is overwhelming. I think it's 5 or 6 to 1 Democrat to Republican registration. So that's sobering. Now, the scaremongering that Cuomo did and Sliwa did, but especially Cuomo and his surrogates, through so-called independent expenditures from these super PACs, it falsely claimed Mamdani was anti-Semitic, using his Muslim faith and support for Palestinian rights as signifiers of anti-Semitism. And that was just atrocious, but it was ubiquitous. I think it scared a lot of Jews in New York City. Only 30% of the Jews voted for Mamdani, even though Jews tend to be the most liberal ethnic group. In New York City, they were the ethnic group that voted the least for Mamdani. So the scare tactics certainly had effect in the Jewish community, but also in the more conservative, slightly more middle class precincts in Staten Island and outer Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. So that's something to think about. Mamdani underperformed other Democrats in a year. So the one thing about the New York election, it was not nationalized, although national figures weighed in. It was very much local, and that's where Cuomo got some traction with his racist ads, and Mamdani got traction by talking about affordability. But in the end, it seems like the overall dynamic between the progressive and more conservative voters in New York hasn't changed since 1989 when Dinkins won. And then, Mamdani is not that radical. I mean, his so-called socialist campaign was quite modest in the reforms it demanded. The headline reforms, the rent freeze, free buses, universal child care, are easily accommodated within a capitalist political economy, including New York. Many cities in the world have free public transportation and universal free child care. And New York City had a rent freeze 3 times under Bill de Blasio in 2015, 2016, and 2020. So Mamdani's not that ambitious. Where the rub comes is that he's asking for tax reforms to pay for the free buses and the child care. So he's calling for a 2% tax on income, personal income over $1 million, and an increase on corporate income taxes. Now, the millionaires, and that's not million in wealth, that's $1 million in income in a year. And the corporations can afford to pay a little more taxes. It's not going to hurt them. But the problem for Mamdani is he needs state approval. and Governor Kathy Hochul, the Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins, and the Assembly Speaker Carl Hastie, all Democrats, are against those tax reforms, as is the pro-corporate majority of both Democratic and Republican legislatures. They all oppose higher taxes on the rich and corporations. So Mamdani is kind of pinned in by the corporate Democrats in his own party, as well as Republicans who are a factor at the state level. The corporate Democrats still firmly control the Democratic Party in New York and in the country. So he will face continued hostility from the corporate media and the private economic power of Wall Street and the real estate barons in New York City, who have enormous influence. So I would say Mamdani got into office, but he didn't get into power. He doesn't have legislative majorities with him, even at the city council level. The Progressive Caucus in New York City Council is about a third of the members, and some of them aren't really that progressive. And then at the state level, it's even worse. And when he doesn't deliver on his modest reforms, he's going to be in trouble because people have expectations. That's the problem that Brandon Johnson ran into in Chicago. Just 2 years ago, he got elected with a similar coalition that backed Zohar Mamdani. I think one advantage Brandon Johnson had is he came out of and had the backing of the Chicago Teachers Union, which is a real strong organization in New York, in Chicago. There's not a comparable institution that is backing Mamdani in New York. The Democratic Socialists of America provided a good organizing core, and they built out from that. The DSA in New York it's hard to know because they don't publish their numbers, but in the wake of the Mamdani campaign, it may be 10,000 members. They tend to be a more activist group, but that's not like the teachers union in Chicago. And the unions in New York, most of them did not endorse Mamdani in the primary, and then they did endorse him after, but it's not clear they did much work for him. So he's going to need a social movement behind him to even fight for the modest reforms that he wants. And if he doesn't get them, then there's going to be disillusionment. I think one lesson we should draw from this, and also from Chicago, is that the left should not go for executive power before it has a legislative majority, or it hopes to have, and a social movement that will, keep the politicians honest and drive things forward and keep mobilizing the public and educating the public about why these reforms we're fighting for are worth fighting for. I think another lesson is if you're going to defeat the corporate power structure, you need to do it independent of the capitalist Democrats. I find one of the disappointing things about the Mamdani campaign is when they started, and the campaign core leadership of Mamdani's campaign and the leaderships of DSA and the Working Families Party said at the beginning of the campaign that if Mamdani lost the primary, they weren't going to run independently of the Democrats on the Working Families Party line against Cuomo, who was the front runner at the time. And then as Mamdani rose in the polls, they had another meeting a week or two before the primary election, and they agreed again that if we lose to Cuomo, even if it's close, we're not going to run against him on the Working Families Party line, which tells me that their goal is to be part of the broader Democratic Party coalition, including the corporate Democrats, and sort of be accepted there and maybe have a more influential role, but they're not trying to defeat it. And that's the corporate power structure. That's the system. And if you don't change the system, then the structures of that system that cause high inequality and public austerity are not going to be changed. And so you'll be in office, but not in power. So I think, we're better off running these campaigns outside the Democratic Party with our own party. And then when we win first legislative seats, that gives us a platform to keep advocating for our program. And then if we're ready to take the executive power and be responsible for governing. See, if you get elected and you don't have the power, you end up running the system you want to change. The system you started out to oppose, and that's not a good position to be in it. To be in. And I would say, despite the socialist ornaments around the Mamdani campaign, it was not substantively different in terms of program or policy from liberal Democrats like Bill de Blasio or Democratic mayors in many other cities. It didn't have that fundamental social change perspective or strategy. And if they have one, they're keeping it secret because they focused, and I've praised them for this. To reach voters, you got to have concrete, realistic demands that the voters say, yeah, we could get that, rather than just campaigning abstractly for socialism or even abstractly for affordable childcare instead of free universal childcare, which is what Mamdani raised. So that was good. But there are other changes that Mamdani could have run on that would have foreshadowed structural change, like public banking, public power. Those two reforms would give the city a lot more economic power to plan and execute changes in how investment is made when you have public banks, and in how we make a transition to clean energy in the case of clean, affordable energy in the case of public power, because the renewables are now more affordable than fossil fuels or nuclear power, but the vested interests want to keep using them. So I did a more detailed analysis of the Mamdani campaign for Against the Current. It was after the primary in July, and we'll put that article in the chat. But I think that analysis holds up. I repeated some of the points I make in there, but if you want more, there's a couple thousand words there. So, to sum up, what struck me is Mamdani got the same margin of victory that David Dinkins did in 1989. It's barely a majority. I want to know some more things about the election. Like, okay, if he only got, I think, 22% in Staten Island, did the campaign go out and canvass there? What were they hearing? What were the issues there? Also the same thing for the outer precincts of the Bronx, Brooklyn, and Queens. That will tell us more about why those people stuck with Cuomo, who, remember, is disgraced. 13 charges of sexual harassment, sending people during the COVID crisis to nursing homes to their deaths, and he knowing that they didn't have the capacity to care for these people. And then, his former, even before he got reelected in 2018, his former campaign manager, Joe Percoco, took a bribe to help grease the wheels for the Buffalo Bills stadium. And that scandal, in another way, Governor Hochul is involved in through her husband, who has concessions at the new stadium. And is involved in a company that's going to make a lot of money from it. So, Cuomo was such an unattractive candidate. And, Mamdani is very affable and smiling and humorous and personable. And Cuomo is, I don't know how to describe him. He's just distant, cold, never smiles. It's not like he's a guy you want to, go have lunch with. So it's amazing to me that he got as big a vote as he did, given his personal, the way he presents himself. So I'll be interested to see, if there's any write-up of, the difficulties the Mamdani campaign ran into in those sections of the city that went for Cuomo. But just to sum up this discussion, Tuesday was a massive anti-Trump vote, except in New York City, where I think it was localized and polarized around the same race and class issues that have been a problem in New York since 1989. So rather than enthused by Mamdani's victory, I'm kind of sobered by its narrowness, and the persistent racial polarization that I think was reflected in the election in New York City. So I've been going for 20 minutes. Let me just to have more time for questions and comments. I had a discussion around, new modes of warfare, which involve long-range strikes on civilians more than ground forces confronting each other, which depersonalizes the killing. You can't have these ground forces confronting each other so much anymore because of reconnaissance and killer drones that create a large kill zone that's 10, 20 miles wide that the ground forces can't even reach each other before they're wiped out. And we can see this in Ukraine, we can see it in Gaza, we could see it soon in America's war in Venezuela that may be coming. And what that means is that a lot of the drone strikes out beyond the kill zone, beyond the front lines, are attacking civilians. Those are war crimes. So it seems like the international law is being disregarded by big militaries, the US, Israel, Russia. You see it with, the rapid support forces and the armed forces in Sudan, Islamist and government battles in the Sahel, Rwandan and Congolese armed forces in the DRC. There's just impunity with regard to the laws, humanitarian law regarding war. So we need to put forward a new security architecture. Maybe I'll talk about that next week in more detail. And then just to throw some topics out there, the U.S. government's not only threatening Venezuela this week, it's threatening Iraq, Mexico, and Nigeria. What's that about? COP30, the climate conference is starting on Monday in Brazil, and a lot of meetings are already going on. The U.S. is not there, at least not high-level people. Trump isn't going. He's not going to the G20 meeting either in South Africa this week. So what does that mean? And then we got the shutdown. Trump got the Supreme Court to overturn a lower court ruling that SNAP benefits should be paid, so they're not being paid. And what this is just cruel, mean-spirited class war by Trump and his ilk, the class that backs him, the billionaire class, or at least the right-wing faction of it. They want working people to suffer and be weak, so we can't fight for decent wages, working conditions, and public services. That's what this shutdown is about, and Trump and the MAGA Republicans are using it to try to dismantle public services. So there's a lot to talk about. So I'm going to stop there and see what you got to say. Do we have any? Okay. Vicky Corden says flights have been canceled due to shutdown. Yeah, I heard today they're going to cancel 20% of them by the end of this coming week, which is going to be a problem. The end of this coming week is getting into the extended Thanksgiving holiday period. It affects business. People have to travel, for work. It's a real, it's going to cripple a lot of people's plans, including businesses, not just personal plans. And all I can see is that making more people mad at Trump, because I think, the Republicans are getting the blame for most people for this shutdown. He's in charge and he's let this happen. So, yeah, the shutdown is a big problem for Trump. Scout Trooper 164, any thoughts on how Ukrainians are holding Pokrovsk despite the hardships they're going through? They really want Russia to bleed and make it feel like a Pyrrhic victory. Well, it's really hard to tell, day to day what's going on in Pokrovsk. I think the Ukrainians are making an orderly retreat. That's why some are still fighting in Pokrovsk and also Mirnograd nearby. So there's a corridor for the troops who are not in the urban areas to get back on the other side. There are defense lines behind Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, which I guess the Ukrainians will try to hold. And Yeah, the Russians are losing a lot of people, trying to take these two. It's hard to call them cities; they're more like towns. But they're, I think they're in the order of, I think 60,000 in Bakrovsk and 30,000 in Mirnograd. Um, and there's nothing left there. I mean, the Russians have already bombed them into rubble. So uh, it's more like where the front line is than you're defending, a valuable asset. At one time, Pokrovsk was a good uh, transport hub for the Ukrainian military, but they've made other arrangements quite a while ago. So it doesn't have that much strategic importance. I think the big thing is politically. Everybody's trying to get Trump's ear, and Putin wants Trump to think that the Ukrainians can't win, and therefore Trump should force them into this land for peace deal on Russia's terms. And the Ukrainians are trying to convince Trump that we can win, and or at least hold off the Russians if you give us support. So I think the implications are more political than they are military. I noticed just a comment that I think is worth repeating. The Dems flipped 13 state House seats to gain the largest majority in 40 years. Okay, that must be in a particular state. Is that Virginia? Because at first I thought you were talking about 13 state houses across the country, which I hadn't heard, but 13 state houses to gain the largest majority in 40 years. I'm guessing that's Virginia because I think that's where you live or live near. Anyway, maybe we get clarifications on what state house that is. Scout 164. The fact Mississippi was one of the states that got Democrat senators to win is a hell of a shocker. That's usually considered the worst state in the country. So these are Democrat state senators, I assume. Yeah, that shows, I think, the anti-Trump vote. I'm not familiar with that. That's news to me. I haven't heard of any, big issues particular to Mississippi. Like I said, I think the message of Tuesday was, we don't like Trump and we want changes. The Green Garrett. Green Party of England and Wales has over 150,000 dues-paying members now. What can U.S. Greens learn from their rapid growth? Is Zach Walensky a Green Mamdani? Yeah, there have been some commentaries written both here and in Britain about, how interesting it is. These guys have similar, optimistic, focused presentations of themselves. They both support Palestinian rights. Zach is a Jew. Mamdani is a Muslim. But they have similar economic populist views and program. Now, what the Greens can learn from their rapid growth is, first of all, they're a membership party, and they pay dues, which gives them resources. They have an infrastructure U.S. Greens do not have, because we don't ask people to support the party as a condition of being a member. Modest contribution. If you're not willing to put some money behind the Green Party, why should you have any role in its decision making? I mean, that just seems to be minimal commitment. So we have the resources to, carry through things. So I think that's one thing we can learn from how the Green Party of England and Wales is structured as a membership party. The Greens in the U.S. are unique in the world in that respect. We just have, Greens are people that vote Green, or in states where you can sign registration to Green so you can vote in Green primaries. But most of those states don't have Green primaries because we're too small in those states. So there's not much incentive to even register as a Green. We have about 260,000 Greens registered in different states around the country. But you can only register Green in maybe a third of the states. So, Green support, I would say, is between 500,000 and 1 million, the core Green vote. And we need to get that organized in order to advance. Another thing the British Greens have done, the Green Party of England and Wales, but also the Scottish Greens and the Irish Greens, is they have got to the point where they can elect people to the national parliament based on the fact that they elect people to local parliaments or legislatures. And the Greens have over 800 members who are elected to local councils, local legislatures in England and Wales alone. They got many more in Scotland and the Irish Greens, where they have ranked choice voting, proportional ranked choice voting, have a lot too. That gave them a foundation so they're credible when they run for the parliament in the case of Britain. Now, the Greens in Britain, they had one member of the parliament, Caroline Lucas, for several years. In the last election, they got 4, which was a big breakthrough. In the current polling, I just saw this morning, they are now polling higher than every party but Reform. That's the party on the far right. They're polling a couple points ahead of Labor, I think 3 points ahead of the Tories, the Conservatives, and about the same amount ahead of the Liberal Dems. And proportionally, I'm not sure if the projection was based on that proportion or on going district by district where the Greens could win, but it was projecting 51 Green members of the House of Commons in the next election, which I believe is, I'm not sure when it is, but they are exploding right now. And also interesting there is the so-called Your Party that Jeremy Corbyn and what's her first name? Sultana are calling for. But that group, Sultana and Corbyn, aren't on the same page. And I just read something this morning that they aren't even planning to have local branch meetings until March. And to participate in local elections in England and Wales next year, they're in May. So they're just not going to be ready for the next election. So I think a lot of the interest that Corbyn and Sultana generated is going into the Greens because the Greens are organized and ready to incorporate people. So that's another thing, because there will come a time when we have another situation, say like 2016, when Bernie Sanders, did well in the primary, but then a lot of people felt the Democratic establishment denied him the victory he should have had. And you had what they called Dem exit. And the Greens, brought in some people with that, but we weren't really organized to incorporate those people right into local structures where they could be active on a constant basis. That's, I think, another lesson is we got to get better organized at the grassroots. We need to re-emphasize building locals. And that's the foundation for success at the state and national level. So, and then, you have people who are talented at presenting our point of view. And Zach is one of those people. Zoran, in terms of the program he presents, is talented. And we got people like that in the Green Party. So when our time comes, I'm sure we'll have somebody that people can rally around and just be our spokesperson. That's another thing the Greens in England and Wales do. They elect a spokesperson. Sometimes they elect 2. And then that person is the face of the party with the public and the media. The Greens, on the other hand, we got 9 or 10 members of the steering committee. And of course, there are no resources at that level. So our media is basically press releases that go out, are emailed out. They pretty much get ignored. We don't have a person that could go to the National Press Club and have a news conference and go to the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the LA Times, NBC, ABC, CBS, PBS, and be recognized by those media outlets as speaking for all of us Greens. The closest we have to that is a presidential candidate, but the difficulty there, as I found out, is, we are considered marginal to the horse race. So I was totally blacked out. Jill Stein's got more of a platform in 2016 because of the Dem exit. And then in 2024, as sort of the foil for the people trying to get people mobilized behind Genocide Joe. And, that was a good opportunity for the Greens. I mean, we were offered a choice of genocide with Biden, fascism with Trump, or the Greens. And unfortunately, I don't think the campaign did as good a job as it could have going to the mass media. It seemed they were focused on, trying to go viral on Twitter and going on podcasts that were pretty marginal to the national debate. Now, maybe that's all they could get, but I just know from talking to some of their media people, they were not focused on, getting someone like John Nichols, who writes for The Nation, as well as I think it's the Madison Times. He's a respected journalist. He's on MSNBC and Democracy Now! And, I've worked with him over the years running for governor. He wrote one article where he mentioned me for president. It's about the best piece of media I got in 2020. We need to cultivate those kind of relationships in our media operation, and I don't think we've been good at it. And part of that is our national committees are basically, each state party can nominate up to 3 people for these committees. I'm not sure the media committee may be elected by the national committee. I'm not sure, but the politics and the competence of the people taking those positions really never comes out for discussion. And that's because we're not a membership party. So it all happens through these indirect representation through state parties, which is kind of hard for the grassroots member or local party organization to participate in. So there's some thoughts, Green Garrett, that I think we can learn from the Green Party of England and Wales. Scott 164. Also, Trump was threatening to send National Guard if Mamdani won. But now that he won, Trump is being hesitant as hell. Is Trump horrified that a socialist won, or is he just tacoing like usual? Yeah, I think he's tacoing. Taco, Trump always chickens out, is the acronym first given to him by people on Wall Street around the tariffs. He knows if he went into New York with the National Guard, he might not even get the New York National Guard to participate. Certainly the governor would resist that, and then the guards, men and women as well may. I don't think that would be popular in most of New York. Maybe the upstate guardsmen, because we got an upstate downstate thing, would feel okay about going to New York City, but they wouldn't be welcomed there by the people. So maybe Trump is figuring he doesn't need that as another headache. But I don't know. Who knows what the hell's going on in that man's mind? In any minute, he seems to listen to the last person that talked to him. Okay, I see Charles Keener said in the chat it was Virginia where they elected a majority for the first time in, 40 years? I'm trying to remember the number, but so the state legislature swung hard to the Democrats in Virginia, which again, unless Charles wants to tell us there was some big Virginia issue that I'm missing, that was an anti-Trump vote. Charles Keener, New York City had the largest turnout in decades. Mamdani was the first to surpass 1 million votes since Lindsay in the 1960s. Yeah, it was a election in which a lot of people participated, and the fact that Mamdani was not the typical New York Paul, I think had a lot to do with that. And the fact that the establishment, these dumb billionaires, they wasted millions of dollars on Cuomo, first in the primary and then in the general. Everybody from so-called moderates like Michael Bloomberg to right-wing nuts like Ackerman, head of one of those hedge funds. So a lot of people got paid well to be, to write these ads or produce these videos. But I guess it was good for them, but it wasn't so good for the billionaires because their man didn't win. So yeah, there's high interest in this election, no doubt. And Mamdani, given that he's a very young, 34 years old, Muslim, immigrant, uh, and supports Palestinian rights in a city that has a large Jewish population, where that has not until recently been a very popular position. There's the Jewish community is being alienated by the right wingers running Israel, and although it wasn't so much reflected in this vote, as I said, it was 70-30 Cuomo over Mamdani, and so I think Cuomo's the big bucks he spent on scaremongering about. I mean, they were saying stupid stuff like Mamdani's going to bring in Sharia law, and there'll be another 9/11, and all this scare stuff that only people that are not well informed about politics would fall for. But not everybody's well informed, so they do fall for stuff. Anthony, Green Party. Question. Our state Green Party is dealing with ML, it's Marxist-Leninist entryism, struggling to navigate accommodating the MLs with allowing them to completely take over. How did Greens handle this in the past? In America, we did. We had a youth group of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization, FRIZO, capture the national office. This would have been about 1991. And I didn't even realize that I knew those people until after the fact. And basically, they ran the national office poorly. They were selling lots of merchandise, but they weren't setting aside money to restock. So they thought they were, bringing in all this money. And then when they had to restock the merchandise, they realized they were broke. And so, without any, particular politics, they were just incompetent. Now, in the German Greens, I know in the 80s, that was a question. What happened there was a lot of people who were 60s radicals became Marxist-Leninists, many of them Maoists. They called them the K group, capital K for communist, in the early 70s. But they had a discussion through the 70s, and particularly Rudi Dutschke, who was the most prominent figure of German SDS, which was the Social Democratic Party youth organization that broke from the party and formed the extra parliamentary movement. And then in the 70s, people like Rudy and, Petra Kelly coming along later, really out of the Bobby Kennedy campaign in 68. She was more liberal. Other radicals, groups calling themselves eco-socialists in Hamburg, people coming out of the direct action movements against nuclear power, the radical feminist movement, they all said we need a multi-tendency mass party. And the Marxist-Leninist groups dissolved themselves. They stopped the democratic centralism where everybody had to follow the same line. And they went in as individuals or parts of their local chapters and participated that way in a democratic manner. And I don't know if they actually adopted it. I know Rudy Barrow, who was a prominent former East German who wrote a big critique of so-called real socialism that got him imprisoned in East Germany, and then he was released to the West and helped form the Green Party at the end of the 70s, early 80s. He said, we should not allow groups that are democratic centralists. In other words, they're not responsible to the organization they're joining, but responsible to, another organization. We shouldn't allow them in. So that would be what I would say to people, that if it's an organized Marxist-Leninist group, say, look, you got your own group. If you all want to join us as individuals, fine. But if we find out that you're acting within the party under discipline of another organization, then we're going to throw you out. That's what I would suggest. And that's, that will take some tough discussions and explanation. I'm not sure what state you're in, Anthony, but, our green activists come with various degrees of experience on the left. Some come straight out of social movements, single issue movements, peace movement, environmental movement, women's movement, and haven't been on the left where these kind of groups operate. So it's probably going to take a lot of discussion and explanation and seeing if you can come to an agreement. But I sympathize with them. And it's interesting. I'm curious as to what group wants to take over the Greens. Because in a way, because we're so loosely organized, I mean, you take over the Greens, you're really just capturing yourself if you're an organized group, because, you know, most Greens are pretty anti-authoritarian, and they're not going to, you know, they're not going to be told what to do. You got to convince them of a position. So that's an interesting problem. I hope it works out well. Jack V. Lucas. In my hometown, we have a far-right school board member who's been caught liking Nazi Instagram posts. And there are probably many more like her. We need more Greens to run for school boards. I completely agree. That's a great place for Greens to get a foothold in community politics. And schools are a big part of that. And there is a big battle now. The far right is focused on taking over school boards and basically bringing in all these prejudice, discriminatory policies toward openly toward trans people, but pretty openly against LGBT people, maybe more covertly against ethnic minorities, and bringing in things like school prayer. You know, in a state institution, a public school, which is we're supposed to have separation of church and state, and crazy ideas like you know, creationism, teach both creationism and evolution, but the kind of that'll lead to teaching people creationism, which is anti-scientific. I mean, it's really against the purpose of real education. So I agree. School boards are a great place for Greens to get involved in community politics. And it can be a springboard for then running for city council or state legislature. You know, I've seen that not just in the Green Party, but in other parties. So, and, you know, the schools are important institutions. So, you know, the Greens have plenty to say there. So I second your encouragement to Greens running for school boards. Scott 164, got any response to Plattner denouncing Cheney after his demise? It feels nice he criticized the guy instead of rolling with being the VP. Yeah, I didn't hear the denunciation of Cheney, but I'm fine with that. There was a lot of sort of mass media, you know, praise for Cheney, and Cheney got a lot of credit with them because he was against Trump, but his long record of war crimes and justifying terrorism and torture in black sites, you know, is nothing to celebrate. So I don't know exactly what Plattner said, but at least he wasn't, you know, joining in the choruses of commiseration about the demise of Cheney. You know, let's hope we get past what he stood for as soon as possible. Scott 164, I think we need to ban AI now. Neil deGrasse Tyson had to make a video showing a deep fake of him claiming the earth was flat. If they can do it to him, they will do it to others. Yeah, I mean, if you're going on Twitter these days and you know, your feed, a lot of that stuff is fake. I'm getting a lot of animal videos where, you know, I don't know, dogs are lying down with lions, or, you know, impossible things or unlikely things happening, and they're fake. And we even got AI now on Twitter. I think it's Grok, and you click on that button and it'll tell you whether it thinks it's fake or not. So you really got to be careful. I think not just the deep fakes, but the whole danger that AI will become autonomous and defend itself from humans. just because of the programs that are written in that were not intended to make them autonomous, but collectively do, because AI is scanning the internet to get all this information, and it can teach itself how to survive despite what we do and dispense with us. Like the movie Space Odyssey 2000, where Hal tells the astronaut, I don't need you anymore, or whatever he said, and takes over. That is a realistic and a real possibility that we need to be concerned about. And we don't have legislation or a scientific consensus on how to handle this. It needs to be regulated, if not paused. I've put in the chat here in previous podcasts a link to a website. I think it's called Pause AI. I would check that out. This is a issue that I'm still trying to learn more about, but I think there are legitimate concerns. And Neil deGrasse Tyson, I have a lot of respect for him. And I don't know is he calling for a ban, or is he saying we need to pause and study it, or we need regulation? I'm curious as to what his policy actually is, but he's a credible authority on these things that I would listen to. Andrew Hager 02. What about the effects of generative AI are having on our planet in and of itself? ChatGPT has been proven to use a lot of water and electricity. Pretty soon we'll run out of fresh water to drink. The water crisis, in many parts of the world is already severe, and it's going to lead to, people having to migrate from their homelands, even though they maybe don't want to, just because of the environmental conditions. You got to have water. And the electricity. I seem to remember, I mentioned this before, Amory Lovins, who I think is now out of Stanford. He used to run the Rocky Mountain Institute. He's been a advocate with a lot of scientific, backup for renewable energy against nuclear power. He has said that the projections for the amount of energy that AI is going to need are exaggerated in order to justify creating new power plants. The nuclear industry has an incentive to do that. So do the fossil fuel, gas-fired plants, even the coal plants. So the energy thing is serious, but it may not be as bad as we think. But the environmental consequences of AI, have to be taken account of. And, we're at a point where our political economy, our economic system is destroying the planet, both in terms of the resources it extracts and the crap it puts back into the environment, the poisons, the toxins, the microplastics, the bad air, from fossil fuel burning. We're at a point where we got to maybe say, we don't need this, or we don't need as much of it. What we need is and this is why we need eco-socialism, we need to plan to produce enough so everybody has their basic material needs met. But then that's all we need. We don't need to produce ever more and more so, super rich people can, use, I forget the percent, but, like the top 5% uses, or the top 10% uses more than half of the energy, for things like, private jets and fancy, penthouses and, however they spend that money. That is not meeting basic needs. That's living off the labor of other people, living in luxury at the expense of people being in poverty. And that's not what we need. So, yeah, we need to plan, so everybody's provided for, but we're not out of balance with the environment, with the ecosystems. BD Nimitz. There are numerous angles coming out with tech to deal with the freshwater thing. Something or later useful at scale will arrive. I'm not sure what you're referring to. I know aquifers are being drained. Uh, a lot of people talk about solar desalination. That may be something particularly uh, in like California or Saudi Arabia. I think they're doing a lot of that in the Middle East. Um, we had a green. He's been disabled by a stroke in recent years. He's still around. Paul Glover had a great little booklet. You can find it online called "The Future of Los Angeles," where he basically and he uses drawings. First start with this. It's like a six uh, picture cartoon on the cover, and it starts as all black and white, and then it gets greener and greener as you go through the six boxes. And what it would do is largely replace roads with trolley systems, which Los Angeles used to have. Starts bringing agriculture, particularly fruit trees, back into the built-up urban part of Los Angeles. And instead of shipping the water from the Colorado River and the runoff from the Sierra Nevada mountains, it's producing water from desalinizing salt water with solar energy. And of course, instead of fossil fuel powered power plants, you have solar and wind power. And it's a vision of how to get there. It was written in the early 80s. It's one of the favorite, pamphlets I've ever read. And I think it's a good vision of what we should be proposing in our local elections, a Green New Deal for whatever community we're in. B.D. Dimmitt, drawing water directly out of the air for one thing. Okay. There's definitely humidity in the air. I'm going to, after this, go online and see what I can find out about that. I think a general point is we need to not be anti-technology because it's going to help us solve these problems. What we got to be anti is production for profit instead of for use. Because production for profit, that system, capitalism, depends on endless accumulation to keep functioning until it can't be for environmental reasons, if no other reasons. And that's why we need eco-socialism. Andrew Hager, desalination, you mean filtering seawater to rid it of salt? Yeah, you basically evaporate the seawater and the water vapor is rid of salt and other minerals that are in the water. And then it condenses into, clean water. Okay, another hour has gone by. A lot of questions in a lot of areas. I appreciate them. And I haven't anybody lined up as a guest next week. Let's see, I'm looking at the calendar right now because I have some ideas and some people that might come on, but the 15th and then the following weekend is before Thanksgiving. So, I may have a guest, I may not, but I think there's plenty to talk about post-election, maybe pre another war the U.S. gets in, what's going on with the shutdown. There's so much to talk about in terms of our politics that, maybe we'll do that again next Saturday. Probably will. So anyway, like I say at the end, everybody, if you're not, get involved in a local group. It'll make you smarter because your ideas will be tested out by others and you'll learn from them and everybody will get smarter. And working together is a lot more inspiriting than being by yourself, just watching these screens and reading the bad news. So, get organized and get active and have a good week. And we'll see you next week.